I was a new student to Southern Lehigh High School in Pennsylvania. Going into my junior year of high school, not knowing anyone was really rough. Everyone obviously had their friend group sorted out by then. The worst part was lunchtime, though. My school wouldn't let juniors leave for lunch, only seniors, so I had to eat in the cafeteria. I was dreading it because I knew I'd have no one to sit with, and I didn't want to force myself into a random table. When lunchtime finally came, however, I walked into the cafeteria with my tray of food looking for a place to sit. Every single table was taken. I didn't even have the option of sitting alone. But there was one table in the corner of the cafeteria with only 2 kids sitting at it. That was the least intimidating spot to sit, so I walked over and asked if I could sit there. They both looked at each other, and one of them said yeah. I noticed upon sitting down that the 2 were identical twins. They looked like they were partially of Hispanic heritage, but they didn't have accents. They honestly seemed alright. They introduced themselves as Antonio and Bruno, and they had a conversation with me. They invited me to hang out with them after school, and honestly I figured why not? I had to start off somewhere as far as making friends. I got their numbers, and after school I went home to drop off all my stuff. Shortly after, I got a text from Bruno, telling me he and his brother were planning on hanging out. He told me to meet them around 9 that night at the nearby cemetery that was like a 10-minute walk from my house. He said there was a cool hangout spot near there. Plus, the first day of school was on a Friday, so we had off the next day. I had nothing to do, so I said, yeah, I'm down. When the time came, Bruno texted me one more time asking if I was still coming. I said, yeah, I'm gonna leave in a few, and confirmed we were meeting on the road by the cemetery. He said yeah, so I began my walk in the dark to the cemetery. The longer I walked, the more I thought about my whole move and being the new kid in high school, and thinking about the fact that I was literally walking to a cemetery at night to hang out with 2 kids I just met. But anyway, I got to the little road next to the cemetery and asked Bruno where they were. He started typing right away, and he said they were in the woods hanging by a small lake that they wanted to show me. Then he promptly sent his location. So I made my way into the woods, pushing branches out of my way, using my tiny phone flashlight as my only light. I started calling for Bruno and Antonio as I felt like I was close enough, according to the location he sent me at least. Suddenly I heard footsteps, so I stopped. Definitely footsteps approaching me, but they were very low and slow. I called out that they better not be trying to scare me. When they weren't answering me though, I decided this was stupid. I turned and started walking back towards the road. But those footsteps I mentioned earlier, they turned from quiet and slow to fast, and before I could even react, someone had their nails digging into my neck, effectively choking me. I heard a familiar voice screaming, "Grab him, grab him." I managed to break free from this sort of chokehold and sprinted towards the road. I know they followed me until the tree line by the road. I was faster than them, and I could run for miles. And that's what I did. I ran straight home and told my parents. They considered calling the cops, but I thought it would be better to get pictures of the nail marks on my neck and report it to the school the next day. That's what we did, and with the help of the text that I got from Bruno, I was able to get the 2 students expelled. My parents made me block both their numbers. I didn't exactly argue with that though. My parents wanted me to confirm that these kids didn't know where we lived, and I told them simply, not as far as I know. So anyway, one night about a week later, I woke up to my room feeling really cold. I heard the sound of wind blowing into my room, and I looked at the window to see it was slid completely open. I wondered if my mom came in to open it, but that would make absolutely no sense. It was like 50 degrees out that night. I walked over to it and looked down below. A few feet below my bedroom window, there's a part of the exterior of my house that comes outward, creating a sort of ledge underneath my window that my father always told me to jump onto in case of a fire. I shut my window and walked over to my parents' bedroom. I gently knocked and opened the door, and my mom groggily asked what. I had to ask her if she opened my window. She sat up saying, "No, why?" I told her in a louder, more concerned voice now that my window was opened all the way by somebody. She started shaking my dad to wake him up and go check my room with me. But when he woke up, he told me to grow up and go back to sleep. I left my parents' door open as I walked back down the hall to my room. Then, I picked up on something that I'm surprised I picked up on. My door. It seemed to be half shut now, as opposed to completely open when I left. I pushed the door open just a little bit so I could get a look through the crack and see if, someone was behind the door. Even though I had the thought of the possibility, I never could have actually expected to see it. There was someone hiding behind my door. I screamed for my dad like a little girl. I screamed so loud I'm sure it could be heard 3 doors down. Then my door suddenly slammed shut, just as my dad came rushing out of his room over to me. I screamed, "There's people in my room," so he barged into the room and turned the light on. At that moment, we saw the leg of a person jumping out my window. My dad ran to the window, then downstairs and out the front door to attempt to chase them down, but he came back a few minutes later out of breath, saying he didn't see anyone. Full of energy and fear, I swore it had to be those twins that I got expelled. My dad called the police, and I had to talk to them when they arrived, explaining the whole story back to the incident in the woods. My father backed up my story, but without proof of who entered, they said there wasn't anything they could do. They merely ordered us to lock the doors and consider installing cameras outside. As positive I am that it was either one of or both of those twins in my room, after getting through a solid couple months of sleeping in fear, nothing to this nature ever happened again. Looking back now, I don't know why I was so willing to meet these kids in the woods at night. I should have realized in the cafeteria that day that they looked like trouble, and I should have stayed away. Freshman year of high school, 2007. Gym class, last period. We had a substitute gym teacher on one of the stormiest days of the year. He was an older man, not a senior citizen, but gray, maybe 55 to 60. He took attendance, and when he passed me, he did a double take at me, which I found a bit uncomfortable. Not to float my own boat, but I always understood I looked older and really good for a freshman in high school. The sub told us to get into our volleyball teams, and he disappeared into the hall by the locker rooms for a while. 40 minutes went by and the period was over. It was time for us to get changed and go home. I got into the locker room, but for some reason, my locker wasn't opening. I tried my usual combination over and over and over. It wouldn't click open though. I had to go to the sub and let him know to ask for my combination again. I figured maybe the combo just slipped from my mind for some reason. The sub told me to give him a few minutes and he'd get the list of locker combos. I waited outside the office, and out he finally came with a book in his hands, open to a specific page. He walked into the girls' locker room with me, which I didn't expect him to do. The locker room was basically empty now, with one girl finishing up changing. We walked over to my locker and tried the combination written down on the paper. It didn't work no matter how many times he tried it. Each time he tried it and failed, he would look at me and laugh. I would force myself to laugh along to be polite, but it started getting weird. He put his hand on my shoulder as he said, "We'll figure this out." He tried the combination again, with his hand still on my shoulder. When it didn't work again, I felt his hand slowly started inching down from my shoulder to my lower back. I pushed myself away and grabbed my bag, saying, "It's okay, I'm late for my bus." He tried a combo in the locker one more time, and it opened. He smiled and walked away. I waited till I heard the locker room door shut. Then I proceeded to getting changed quickly, when suddenly the room went dark. I finished pulling up my pants and shut my locker in the dark. I threw on my backpack and started walking to the back exit of the locker room, which led outside. I feared that the sub would be waiting right by the door for me. I got predatory vibes from him. When I got to the end of that specific aisle of lockers I was in the intersection of 2 rows. I'd have to turn down left to get to the exit door, but still. Naturally, I had to look right to make sure that it was clear. there was a little light seeping in from one single rectangular window that sat under the ceiling. It was enough. Enough for me to see him peeking at me from around the wall of lockers. So that's when I ran for the exit door. He came over behind me saying, wait, it's not what it looks like. I ran outside into the rain off the campus of the high school and walked the rest of the way home, giving me time to reflect on what happened. By the time I got home, soaking wet, it came to me that he most likely changed my locker combination somehow as a way of getting alone with me in the locker room. As for what he could have possibly been planning to do when he cut the lights, I never wanted to imagine. Honestly, I was too emotionally scared and quite frankly embarrassed to tell anyone about it, not even my parents or friends. It was something I just kept to myself all these years, because truthfully, I just don't feel comfortable telling people. When I was in high school, I was in the band. At my school, band was basically an easy A. It was either that, orchestra, or chorus, so I went with band. Anyhow, our band teacher, Mr. Nicholson, had the grading system set up so that as long as you attended class and went to your weekly lessons, you got an A. Sadly, towards the end of one quarter, I was missing 2 lessons, and because of that, my grade was a B. I went to him after class to ask if I could make up the lessons, and even though he seemed reluctant, he said he would let me come in during a lunch period and practice in one of the downstairs storage rooms to get credit for a lesson. I was more than happy with that, because realistically, I would probably just play games on my phone anyway instead of actually practicing. I arrived to the music room during my lunch period the next day, so I took my saxophone and headed down the stairs outside the music room towards the basement area for the music department. It was always kind of creepy down there because absolutely no one besides the music teachers would go down there usually, and the lights were kind of shitty. I'd only been down there a couple times before that day. But anyway, I walked down the hallway, and on either side were a bunch of doors that led into small, maybe 7 by 7 feet rooms. All of these rooms were used for storing things like chairs, music stands, spare instruments, Christmas decorations, and whatever. I stepped into one of the rooms and shut the door. I set up my music on one of the stands in the room just in case Mr. Nicholson were to come down to check on me. But really, I didn't plan on actually playing. I started playing games on my phone and then flick. Darkness. Like, as dark as it could get. Minus my phone screen. I looked over to the light switch to the room just instinctively and flicked it up and down a few times, but that did nothing. I stumbled as I got up from the seat to open the door, to more darkness. I held my phone out in front of me to light up this little hallway, even if it was just barely. I think I had like an iPhone 3 or something, and those old ones didn't have flashlights. But anyway, that little light from my phone was enough to see one of the doors open near the end of the hall, and I heard something being dragged in that room, like one of the big plastic containers. There was also manic breathing, followed by animal-like grunting. Then I saw a big plastic container being pushed out of that room into the hallway. As I saw this, I turned off my phone screen and went back into the room I was just in. I shut the door so quietly. I don't know what exactly I was thinking in that moment that I decided to hide, but I think the strange sounds I was hearing from this person, mixed with the random blackout, made me wary of staying in that hallway. Whoever that was blocking the stairs though. Of course, I got no reception down in that little basement area. All I felt comfortable doing was sitting in that room and waiting for the lights to hopefully turn back on. But the lights seemed like they were never going to turn back on. So I decided I would try and get back upstairs again. I quietly opened the door with my phone in front of me for light. Then I stepped into the hall. I inched up a little closer to the stairs, then I heard something again. I quickly crept into the next closest room with the door open and shut it. I still didn't know what I was hiding from. Could it have been a staff member or janitor? At that point, the only reason I had of thinking it wasn't was because they only appeared down there after the lights turned off. I stood in that room in complete darkness, only listening and waiting for another sound from outside. But you know how when you're in a room with someone, even if you don't necessarily hear them, you can kind of just sense their presence? That's suddenly the feeling I got standing in that pitch black room. I lifted my shaking hand up and pressed the home button on my phone to turn on the screen, just for half a second. That was enough to see someone standing in the corner of this little storage room, 3 feet away from me. I pretended I didn't see anything, but it was too late. Shh, is what I heard, breaking the silence. Then, a hand patted my shoulder twice and started squeezing it. I basically dove for the doorknob, struggling to find it at first, but pulling the door open when I did. The man in the room with me tried pushing the door shut after I opened it, but I was already out. I ran up the stairs and out the door to the main level of the music hall, where the lights were still on. I ran to Mr. Nicholson to tell him, out of breath. He called security to check the basement section of the music hall, but security came back upstairs and said besides a bunch of music equipment moved around, there wasn't anyone down there. The rest of the period, Mr. Nicholson canceled his flute lesson, and I sat there in the room with him and 5 flute players, explaining the whole story in detail. Without cameras in the music hall, there was no way of catching whoever went down there and killed the power for the basement. It seemed that he was trying to steal expensive music equipment. That, or God knows what else. The next day, I was called into the dean's office to give my story of what happened, and the rest is history. My friends and I hatched a genius plan. We'd sneak into the high school basement through one of the windows that was broken and never fixed. The thing about this window, you'd have to hop a short metal gate surrounding an outside staircase leading to the basement. Not that it would effectively stop anyone, but it added that extra barrier that makes you feel like you're really doing something devious when you crossed over it. We made sure there weren't any security cars anywhere nearby and hopped the gate. Crawling in through the window proved difficult, considering we had to boost ourselves up, then crawl through an insanely skinny opening. But once we were in, we were in. We kind of dispersed from each other to explore different areas. One thing was for sure, the basement of the school was a mess, and anything but interesting. There was little light. One small white light was on in a far corner, and the exit sign light actually produced more light than you'd think. I was looking around when I saw one of my friends in front of me. He whispered, "Let's go upstairs." So I followed him upstairs, and he opened the door up to the main hallway of the school. Everything was dark. I always thought there were at least some lights left on in the school at night. But no, not a single light was on. And all that really stood out as far as the eye could see were the various exit signs glowing red. I followed my friend down the hall and remembered saying, "Dude, this is really creepy." And he replied back, "Shh." But I realized he was right. Who knew if somebody else could be in the building besides my friends and I? Little did I know just yet. I followed my friend to the bathroom, and he went into one of the stalls. I whispered, "Hurry up." I waited for a while. Then my phone started to ring. I picked up, and it was one of my friends, Chris. He asked, "Where the hell did you go?" I said I'm upstairs with either Roland or Brandon. He said, "What do you mean? They're with me." And right after, both Brendan and Roland said hi, apparently on speakerphone. I stuttered the word "I" and stopped, trying to think straight. Then there was a laughing coming from in the stall, not the laugh of any of my friends. I looked up at the stall. There was someone looking over it at me, probably standing on the toilet. I screamed "holy shit" over and over into the phone as I left the bathroom. Shortly after I was out, I heard the stall door slam shut. I tried to run back to the basement in the dark, but it wasn't too easy to find in the dark. Luckily, I managed to find it, so I started to scream their names as I ran down the stairs. I screamed "go, go" when they answered, and we one by one jumped off some kind of bucket onto the window ledge and crawled back outside. I was the first one out though, afraid that person from the bathroom was following. When we were all outside, I explained to them, out of breath, while also laughing now that I felt safe with all of them next to me. I guess we were loud or something though, because as we all just started looking around at the whole school building and all the classroom windows, in one of the downstairs windows was someone with their hands pressed up on the glass. We could only see maybe half their face. I said that's gotta be him, as Roland ushered us to get the hell out of there. We ran until we were off the premises of the school, and that was that. We came up with a lot of possible explanations, but none of them really made sense. Obviously, we never did anything like that again, though. I was a senior when this happened. Senioritis had fully kicked in. It was football season. Our high school was always big on football games because our football team was actually good, and there's nothing else to do in our boring country-ass town. One day at school, we were in some joke of an elective. My friend JJ was in this class with me, so we'd always mess around. It was a Friday, and there was a football game later that day, so we planned to go. And JJ, being the sweet talker he's always been, spun his chair around to face these girls Kayla and Ashley and asked them to go to the football game with us. We already knew them well, so it wasn't weird of him to invite them or anything. They seemed down to meet us later, so JJ dropped me off at home after school, and like 4 hours later, he picked me up, and then we picked up Kayla and Ashley. Then we drove to the school back parking lot by the woods. We had some Four Locos in the car, making sure nobody was passing by. Then we poured some more into water bottles to bring to the bleachers with us. We walked over to make sure we got good seats at the top row of the bleachers. Since the game started late, it started getting dark during the third quarter, and by the fourth quarter it was dark. Our team was losing pretty bad for a change this game, so bad even that a lot of the kids in the bleachers were leaving early. We just stayed, planning on hanging out on the field after anyway. The game ended and our team lost really bad, and so the field and bleachers were quiet. People were scurrying off the bleachers. The team rushed back inside the locker room in embarrassment, and the away team slowly made their way back to the buses. Within 10 minutes, we were among the only people left in the bleachers, minus a couple others and maybe a couple people in the field. We were honestly drunk by this point, and the team's defeat wasn't ruining our fun. When the field lights turned off, it was basically pitch black here minus the moonlight. Everyone was gone. We went to go lay in the field. JJ ran to his car to get more alcohol. By now, it was probably 10 o'clock. JJ said let's go in the woods next to the football field. The girls of course were scared, and that's why the idea seemed fun. When they wouldn't budge, we both got up and ran towards the woods, leaving them alone in the dark, knowing they'd get scared and follow us, which they did. We crawled under the little ripped chunk of fence that kids would use to get into the woods, and then started walking down the little hill into the woods. The girls were very reluctant to follow, but they did. We ran ahead to lose them and hide just to mess with them. As soon as they heard us running, they both yelled to stop. They tried to keep up, but we lost them and hid behind a couple trees. We hid and laughed for a few seconds. Then JJ patted me and told me to look in that direction. And though it was dark, we could see, perhaps only because of the moonlight barely finding its way through the trees, a towering black figure maybe 15 feet away from us, standing between two trees. It was a horrifying sight. Then they spoke. It was a woman's voice, and she said, "You kids shouldn't be in here." We just stood there and looked in silence at the figure of the apparent woman. But we both noticed she seemed to be getting bigger and closer very quickly, yet we didn't see the legs moving, or what we assumed were legs. We heard no footstep sounds. JJ and I turned and ran. We ran and called the girls' names until we found them. Then they followed us out of the woods. We told them to just follow us to the car and run. At the car, we finally told them that some 7-foot-tall woman was in the woods. JJ said that if I hadn't seen it as well, he would have thought that he saw an apparition. The girls were freaked out, asking us to tell them that we were kidding, but we weren't. We watched from the car to see if anyone came out of the woods. No one ever did. The biggest question is, why would an older woman be in there at night alone? It's not like it was a nature trail, it was a fenced-off wooded area. Our school didn't have security back then either, so it wasn't that. The four of us went to go hang out at JJ's after, and I'll leave the rest of that night to your imagination. Now we're really fast-forwarding to that summer, when I was working at the school one final time as a summertime custodian, since I got a raise every summer that I'd return. There were about 4 of us in the building, 2 older custodians, and myself and another 18-year-old. I was in the center courtyard of the school mowing the grass when I spotted someone at an upstairs window. It was an older woman. She looked like 65 maybe from the distance, with short curly hair, but her face was kind of blurred behind the glare of the window. I stopped mowing, looked at her, and waved. She didn't wave back. She didn't even move. I basically ran inside to where my boss was and asked who that woman upstairs was. He asked who. I told him to follow me. She was in one of the math classrooms. I led him to the upstairs math hallway. But to my surprise, all the classroom doors were closed and the lights were all off. The classroom it looked like she was in was empty. My boss told me there was no one else in the building and that I need to drink some coffee. He went back downstairs, so I did the same. I was genuinely freaked out. After I finished mowing, I started mopping the upstairs hallways and classrooms. Eventually, I was in the math hallway, and I would be mopping every last classroom floor up there, so I opened all the doors and turned on all the lights. I had my radio on the floor playing music as usual. Over the music, I heard a distinct woman's voice. It said, "Young man." It came from one of the classrooms. I couldn't tell which, but I turned off the music and started checking every nearby classroom, desperately hoping to find someone. Every single classroom was empty. I even checked behind the desks. The hairs on my arms were standing up. I felt a fight or flight response kick in. I bailed to the downstairs and told my boss once again someone's up there. I heard a voice now. He once again went up there with me, and I explained that I couldn't find anyone, but I saw and now heard a woman up here. When we didn't find anyone again, he told me to go home and take the day off and get some sleep. He thought I was crazy. I then put the two incidents together. What if they were connected? What if what JJ and I saw in the woods and what I saw and heard in that classroom are somehow related? When I came back to work the next day, I told my boss I just didn't want to work in the math hallway because I was freaked out. For the rest of the summer, I didn't go in that hallway again. Ever since then, I full-heartedly believe that my old high school is haunted by some spirit of an older woman. I have no other explanations. This happened when I was 15, a sophomore in high school. Unfortunately, lunch classes were randomized, so this year I only had my friends Liam and Mike in that lunch period with me. A few months into the school year, one day this new kid walked in first period astronomy. Our teacher, who was a jokester, made him introduce himself to the class. His name was Craig. He teased Craig for a minute, then asked him to sit down. I sat in the back row, and the only open desk was next to me in the back corner. Craig came over and sat next to me. Class didn't technically start yet, so everyone was still chatting. As Craig sat down, he looked around the room, then I felt his stare shift to me. I turned and we made eye contact, and he nodded his head and said, "What's up?" I said, "Hey man, what's up?" He introduced himself, so I gave him my name as well. Craig was a white kid with very patchy, pubish-looking facial hair. He wasn't attractive, but he wasn't butt ugly. He just looked like a somewhat average guy. He was making small talk with me, and I was being nice because I could imagine how rough the first day at a new high school could be. I was probably the first person he officially met in the school. That period, we had to get into pairs for an assignment, so obviously Craig asked me to work with him. I had to say yes, why not? I didn't have any close friends in this class anyway. We had the laptop cart this period to begin work on the assignment, so we all had laptops. I could tell pretty quickly I didn't like Craig's sense of humor. He joked too much and was acting like we were good friends, but his jokes weren't normal, and he'd have this cringy laugh every time he made a joke. He cursed every other word, and he'd make constant dirty and vulgar jokes. I was no softie when it came to that, but it was just too much with him. By the end of the period, we had to exchange numbers for the project. Then it was on to my next class. Eventually came lunchtime. Mike didn't come to school for that day, so it was only Liam and I at our little circular lunch table. Suddenly I see Liam's eyes look up at someone behind me. Then someone pulls up a chair next to me, and I look and see Craig. He pats my shoulder and says, "What's up, buddy?" I kind of died a little inside. This meant he'd be sitting here every day now. I tried to be positive and give him a chance. Maybe he wasn't that bad. Liam tried being nice at first, but eventually Craig started saying weird shit again, and Liam caught on that something was off, and he kept shooting me these knowing faces when Craig wasn't looking. That lunch period cemented the fact that something was off about Craig. I'm not judging anyone for being antisocial, but something about him seemed dark, like the awful things he'd say. It went beyond an antisocial personality. After school that day, since it was a Friday, I walked home and started texting my group chat about what we'd be doing later. On my walk home, I got a text from an unsaved number, and when I opened it, I realized it was Craig. He said, "Turn around." I did, and saw Craig running down the sidewalk towards me, waving. "Oh God," I said under my breath. I waited for him. When he caught up to me, he asked how far I lived from school. I said about a 10-minute walk, and he said same, and he said he'd walk with me. Then he asked if I wanted to work on the assignment real quick and bang it out over some beers. I told him I was actually going to be busy with my friends. He asked what I'd be doing. Uh-oh, he was trying to invite himself. I said we'd just be chilling at Liam's house, and he actually asked if it was cool he came. I didn't even know what to say. I came up with some BS like Liam's mom doesn't let strangers in right away. It seemed to work. Craig kept walking with me, and I started wondering, is he following me all the way home? That's what he did. I got to my house and said, "All right, man, see you later," and gave him a little fist bump. He said, "See you later," and kept walking down the street. I noticed him look back, so I looked away. I texted my group chat about how weird he is, and Liam backed up what I was saying. We went about making plans to hang out at Liam's house for real, but not until like 9 o'clock. After an hour or two later, Craig texted me something disturbing. He said, "Yo, what's going on in front of your house? Why is there a cop car?" I replied, "What do you mean?" I rushed to go outside to the front stoop. There were no cop cars. It was just Craig standing in our driveway. He was laughing, and like a complete weirdo, he laughed and said, "I got you." Then he said, "I thought you were going to your friend Liam's place." I said, "Yeah, in a little bit." Then I said, "Why are you being weird?" He didn't laugh at that. I saw he was visibly offended. I said I gotta go inside, and so I did and shut the door. He texted me all offended saying, "Bro, WTF." I was speechless. I just met this kid today. I spent 40 minutes with him. Why was he obsessing over me and following me and now stalking me? He literally tricked me into coming outside to see if I was home. I texted him back, "You're freaking me out, bro." I guess that was a mistake. He sent me some long message about how he thought I seemed chill and was different from the rest, but how I'm just like everyone else. I sent a screenshot to my friend group, and they were all laughing and shocked at the same time. I emailed my teacher and asked him if I could do the assignment myself and explain the situation. Then I left my house and walked to Liam's house just to get out. While I was at Liam's, Craig tried calling me. I just let it ring and ignored it. It was going to be an awkward day of class come Monday morning. Skipping ahead to when I got home around 11 or 12, my parents and sister were out. My parents might have been out with friends, and my sister may have been with her boyfriend, nothing unusual. I locked the door behind me and went up to my room. I started watching YouTube videos. I heard the back door ring. Yes, our house has a back doorbell. It had a different ring than the front doorbell. I hopped up and went downstairs, expecting to see my sister at the back door. But the lights in the backyard were off, and no one was on the other side of the door. I could see through the glass. I opened the main door, with the screen door still locked. I said hello, and I 100% heard the sound of someone's shoe scraping the concrete patio, just to the left, out of view from the door. I shut the door again and relocked it, and went back upstairs to call my dad, who didn't pick up. But just then, my phone started ringing again. It was Craig. I didn't pick up. He then texted me saying, "Come outside, shitbag." I replied, "I'm calling the police." And to my surprise, he replied, okay, I'm leaving." It was him. He was hiding in the yard, waiting for me to come out. I sent the screenshot to my family and friends, and then to the school, who would reach out to his parents. Apparently, this was the exact reason the troubled family had to keep moving, because he would keep causing issues with people at every school he went to. I can only imagine the horrible things he's done to other people who didn't want to be his friend. He didn't show up to class on Monday, or ever again. If I had to guess, I think he once again transferred schools. I live in rural New Brunswick. It was early September and it was my first day of school. I unfortunately was held back my senior year, so I'd be returning as a 19-year-old. I live in a rural area, so the middle school and high school was the same building, which also meant I knew most of the kids since it was a smaller school. When I got to school, I had study hall period A, which was the first period of the day. However, I noticed a new kid that I never met before on the other side of the room. I walked over to him and introduced myself. He introduced himself to me as Chester, and that he just moved here. I showed him around the school and showed him where his next class is. As I was giving him a tour of the school, I noticed he seemed a bit off. As I was showing him around, he began to ask me questions. At first they seemed normal, like how long I've been at the school or where our classroom was, but then he asked me some questions that seemed more strange. One question he asked stood out the most. He asked for my address and snap. I was completely thrown off by this because I found it off to ask that. I ended up not giving him my address, but I thought why not to give him my snap. I gave him it and went on with my day. When the last period of the day came, I had English class. When I got to it, I noticed that there were only about 9 kids in the class. I was in the lowest level English class, so I wasn't expecting a lot of kids to be in my class. I took my seat, and that's when I looked 120 degrees behind me and saw that Chester kid eating a disgusting sandwich. He stared at me from the opposite side of the room and gestured for me to walk over to him. My English teacher, Mr. Bass, was about to start class, so I ignored his bullshit and went on with the class. 5 minutes later, I looked up from my book, and I noticed Chester again staring at me. This time he was more pissed off looking. Again, he gestured for me to walk over to him, and again, I continued reading my book. Then my phone pinged. It was a Snapchat message from Chester. He said, "Follow me." I replied, "I can't, we're in the middle of class." Next, I saw him get up from his table and ask Mr. Bass if he could go to the bathroom. He then walked out into the hall. I wanted to see why he wanted me to follow him, so 5 minutes later, I asked Mr. Bass if I could go to the bathroom as well. I then walked out into the hall. I didn't know where he went, so I looked down each hallway, and eventually I saw him. He was walking really slowly about 50 feet away. I stayed at a distance behind him so that he wouldn't know I was there. He then turned down a hallway in the school that wasn't really used for classes and was more for storage, bathrooms, and offices. I then saw him open a door. He walked inside and shut the door behind him. I walked over to the door he walked in and recognized it to be the door that led to the school's basement. There was no way in hell I was going down there. I just casually went back to my class. When I got back, my phone pinged. It was him again. First he sent me a message saying, "Why didn't you enter the basement?" He then sent a picture of him eating a disgusting sandwich in the basement. He sent one more chat asking me to walk down into the basement. By now I was getting creeped out by the kid, so I replied asking him to leave me alone. I then removed and blocked him. When I got home, I immediately started on my homework. By the time I was done, it was about 11 p.m. and I was home alone. I was putting all of my homework away. Just then, my phone received a notification from Snapchat. Someone added me as a friend. It was from an account called "Why Didn't You Enter the Basement?" It was him, so I blocked it. Then a couple minutes later, I got another request. This time the account was called "Why'd You Block Me?" I blocked that one, and then another one came. This one was even more ominous. It was called "I Know Where You Live," followed by "I'm right outside your house." And just then, I heard a window break downstairs. I immediately called the cops and told them what was happening, and the operator said find a safe place to hide and lock the door. I then hung up and went into the hallway closet. I heard footsteps move from downstairs to upstairs. I cracked open the closet door and I saw him. At the end of the hallway in the dark, I saw Chester. It didn't seem like he knew that I noticed him until he turned his head to look at the closet, but it didn't seem like he knew I was inside. I didn't close the door, but I hid deeper in the closet. Chester then went over and opened the door. I was hiding behind a large container while he struggled to find the light. He eventually gave up and I heard his footsteps fade away downstairs. Seconds later, the police knocked on the door. I immediately opened it and told them what happened, but by the time they arrived, Chester was gone and there was nobody on my property. They found out that he escaped through a window in my basement. I gave the police the accounts and they said they'll do their best to trace them. The very next day of school, I went to the principal to report Chester. But the creepiest thing was what he told me. My principal said that there was nobody in the whole school named Chester. There were no records of him ever having been a student. I got chills. The camera footage was checked, and it turned out that he snuck in through a back entrance of the school and blended in with the other kids. I never saw him again at school. and I never heard from the police. But to this day, I still think about why he wanted me to go into the school basement. All I can say is that was probably the most dangerous person I'd ever met, and I don't know what his intentions were. My childhood friend Carter moved away with his family to this really rural town in Michigan, but we've always stayed in touch. His family is very country, and I'd go as far as to say they're kind of rednecky, so the move there was no surprise. His family loves me, and I'm always welcome to go visit. We're 19 now, I'm in college, Carter works for his dad. They have a huge property up there. I had visited before, this was not my first time going up there. So it was a weekend in the fall. I was going to stay at Carter's family home up there. His mom and his sister wouldn't be there this weekend. It was just him and his dad. It's a 4.5-hour drive up there. It's a lot of farmland and open fields by them. To get onto their property was a gravel road about 300 feet off the main road. I got there to a warm welcome by both Carter and his dad. They were already sitting in the backyard drinking beers, so after bringing my bag in from the car, I joined them. Carter was telling me about all the trails in the area that we could take my Toyota 4Runner off-roading. I'd never off-roaded before, but I was super down to. Carter's dad grilled us up some burgers first, then he was off to his friend's house. Carter and I got in my car, and he guided me to this nearby trail that he described as perfect for off-roading. It was around 6 o'clock, so we only had a couple hours of light left. We did about an hour of off-roading on various trails not far from Carter's house. When it was starting to get a little darker out, we left the trails and got back on the road because it was even darker when you're in the middle of the woods. As we were just driving around passing a bunch of farmland, we passed this abandoned church-looking building that had a huge cornfield next to it. Carter said he passes this place all the time, but he never checked it out. So what do? Of course, we both agreed to go back and check it out later, but Carter said we should take the bikes over later. His family has a million mountain bikes, fully equipped with lights and everything. We drove back to his house. He grabbed a backpack and threw some tequila and a bottle of Sprite in it, along with some flashlights. We took the 2 best bicycles they had. Each had night riding lights mounted on the handlebars. He said it would probably be a 20-minute bike ride. Both of us are big fitness guys and have been since high school, so I didn't even mind a long bike ride. When we got to the abandoned building, it was pretty dark out now, hence why we brought flashlights. The grass was very overgrown too. We made sure no cars were coming before entering the property just to be safe. We hid our bikes a little bit into the cornfield just so they wouldn't be seen. There was still just enough light outside to navigate without turning on the flashlights. We didn't want to make it too obvious we were here. We were thinking of getting some cool, artsy shots of each other for our Instagram inside the building, if we could find a way inside. The place was definitely an old church. The shape of the windows confirmed it. We went to look through one of the windows, and it was way too dark to see inside. I told Carter to hand me a flashlight. The flashlight made all the difference. We could see inside now. We both noticed something strange in the pews. It was what looked like a person's head hunched over sitting down with their back to us. Carter said it looked like a mannequin, especially considering it was completely motionless. We placed a friendly bet. Carter betting it was a mannequin and me betting it was some drunk homeless man. We went to the front door of the place and saw it was boarded up. Carter shook the door just for the hell of it to see if it would budge, but there was no shot. He implied this meant he won the bet because there was no way for a homeless person to get in there. I said, hold up, let's check the other windows for a closer view. So we walked along the other side of the church to the window we knew had the best angle of whatever we saw in there. But now, when I shined the flashlight through the glass, whatever was in that pew just a couple minutes ago was gone. I told Carter he owes me money because I was right, even though that was also terrifying. He asked, where did they go then? I shined the light in every direction until we both spotted it at the same exact time and jumped. The man standing right to the left of the window on the inside. He was looking at us. It didn't look like no homeless man to me though. We took off running back to the cornfield. We tried to find the bikes in a panic, but we couldn't. It was so dark out now that we were avoiding turning on our flashlights to expose ourselves. We heard a slam from the church building. It sounded like some kind of door. Carter told me to be quiet because he heard sounds in the cornfield, like the crops being brushed through by someone. Then it just stopped and went silent. Dead silent. No breeze at all, so all the crops were just still. We were stationary, ducked down, scared to move. We were in this position for a solid minute before Carter said in a low voice, "Which way did we leave the bikes?" And this was when we heard the crops mere feet away from us being brushed aside as someone was clearly running towards us. I screamed "go" as we both beelined through the crops as some of them were smacking me in the face. At some point we cut out into the open, leaving the cornfield, running back to the road. We were no longer being chased. Carter called his dad right away, and he came and picked us up. He wasn't the kind of dad to get pissed at us for trespassing or drinking or anything like that. He was more so pissed about the bikes, but he said we were right to leave the bikes and run. The next day, he drove us back to that church, bringing his gun with him. We looked in the crops until we found the bikes. Then we threw them in the bed of Carter's dad's truck. We were about to leave when we took a look back at the church and saw someone at one of the windows. It had to be the same person. I guess when he saw us notice him, he creepily walked away from the window. Carter's dad said, "Let's get the hell out of here," because that was genuinely disturbing. For his dad to be creeped out meant a lot. He's a pretty tough guy. We went to some barbecue place afterwards and had a bunch of food and some drinks. Afterwards, Carter's dad called some town number to let them know someone was squatting in that abandoned building. As long as it was brought to their attention, at least we felt like we did something. Who knows if that man is still hiding in that church, though? Or who he was, for that matter. I live on a farm with my brother and his wife. We split the responsibilities in the busy season. In the off-season, they go off traveling quite often. My fiance passed away a few years ago, and I haven't really put myself back out there just yet. I spend a lot of time alone, and the off-seasons really get to me. This was early October, right around the time before our last harvest. My brother Joe and his wife were out of town for a few days. Figure something like this would happen while I'm holding the fort myself. It was a night like any other. The windows in the house were still open to allow that refreshing October breeze to flow through the house. Outside, I suddenly heard a scream. It was the scream of a female. I couldn't tell if it was a teenage girl or a grown woman, but it was blood-curdlingly high-pitched. I sprang up from my lazy boy recliner and went to my gun safe in my bedroom to grab my rifle. I went outside to be greeted by the breezy, chilly air. I stood on the front porch for a second, waiting, and I heard the scream again. It was coming from the cornfield. I fired a round into the air as a warning shot. I didn't at that moment know what was happening. It could have been someone in danger or a group of teens messing around being punks. After I fired the round, I heard a woman's voice yell "help" before there was nothing but silence. I called out, "Who's out there? Where are you?" Nothing but wind now. I turned on every exterior light I had on my house, and I also grabbed my cell phone and called 911 as I walked into the cornfield, calling out, waiting for a response. After telling the operator what I heard, I was left to wait for a few police officers to arrive. There were a total of 4 that ultimately showed up, and with the help of them, we all checked the cornfield, shining flashlights and yelling out for anybody who needed help. I'd imagine that any time someone is reported screaming for help, the cops take it a little more seriously. After we ultimately found no one, I was told by one cop to call 911 again if I should hear anyone scream for help and that they'd be nearby. Then they all left. I went back inside of the house, not before taking one more look out to the cornfield. I closed the door and turned off all the lights. There's not much to do in this county for the local kids, so it didn't seem unbelievable that maybe it was some kids trying to scare some random farmers and homeowners. After another hour of watching TV, I went upstairs to bed. I took a couple melatonins to help me sleep, as I'm a chronic insomniac. Usually, I'd say that's unfortunate. After, I'd guess, an hour and some minutes, I heard creaks and clunks from downstairs. I just realized I never closed the windows downstairs. You can hear everything through the paper-thin walls in this house, and all the floors make noise. I grabbed my cell phone and called my brother Joe. He picked up, and I asked him in a whisper if he's home. He said no. In that moment, all the hairs on my body stood up, and I knew now I was in fight or flight mode. I told my brother there's someone in the house, call the police for me. He was a few towns away, so it would be the same dispatch center. He said he would, no questions asked, and hung up. I tiptoed as quietly as I could to the safe and grabbed my shotgun. I know for a fact I made a noise as I crept to it though. It was inevitable. I heard sounds from downstairs still. There was definitely someone in my house. I crept to the door and opened it. I looked down the stairway to the downstairs. I could still hear the breeze flowing through the house downstairs. The hairs on my arms were standing up. I started inching down the stairs one at a time, trying my best not to make a sound. But I only made it down a few steps before hearing footsteps from downstairs on the wood floors creeping closer to the stairway until a tall, skinny figure appeared at the bottom of the steps. I cocked the shotgun and said, "Don't move." He didn't listen. He almost calmly walked out of sight, and I heard his footsteps then pick up to a run through the living room and then out the back door. I yelled stop as I briefly attempted to chase him, but as soon as he was out of my house, I locked the door and called my brother. He said the cops were on the way. I locked every single window on the first floor and waited for the police to come back. It was the same officers. They did a little search of the perimeter of the property this time with all the lights on. One of the officers said he was going to stay on the property for the night, though I don't think that guy was coming back after seeing I was armed. In fact, he never did. But the story doesn't end there. I was finishing up the last harvest of the season in the combine, and while doing so, I noticed a shoe in the field. I stopped the machine to go pick it up and examine it. It was a woman's shoe, size 8.5. This got me thinking back to the screams I heard, followed by the man breaking into my house hours later. I called 911 once again and left the shoe where it was to not hinder any potential evidence. When police came, they did another investigation of the cornfield, and they took the shoe as a piece of evidence to a possible disappearance. They even brought police dogs to sniff out any possible scents. The strange thing is, there was no missing female reports in our county, not at the time at least. I hope whoever's shoe that is still alive today. It makes me sick thinking someone might have been murdered on my farm. When we were kids, our family had a vacation home in Hollywood, South Carolina. By we, I mean my 3 brothers and I. And by vacation home, I mean this 3-bedroom mobile home. It wasn't fancy, but it was part of our childhood and is still nostalgic to think about. Whenever we got off the highway and started seeing nothing but farms, we'd know we're almost there. I'm the second oldest. At the time of this story, I'm gonna guess our ages were 14, 12, 10, and 8. The mobile home was a little primitive, but we had electricity at least. The TV up there was very old, but it was good enough to bring our PlayStation and play on. We'd been going up there so long that we had a bunch of places we'd love to go. This big playground for an elementary school that we'd always play hide and seek tag in while our parents sat there and read magazines. This grocery store that we would love to play games in as well. We even loved exploring all the woods surrounding the property. The nearest neighbors were a bit of a walk away, but nothing too crazy or far that our parents wouldn't let us walk it. This was the first year that they let our youngest brother Todd come exploring with us too, while they stayed behind in the mobile home. We walked down a different road that strays away from the dead end, and it's worth noting that there was next to no traffic on these roads, as our mobile home was on a long road that eventually led to a dead end, so the only through traffic would be the few people who lived on this road. There was always this questionable looking house and farm that we never saw a car at ever in our lives. It sat at the top of this little hill overlooking the road. There was a small cornfield, which would imply that there were still people living there, but it was just strange how all our lives going there we never saw anyone there, whether it be a person or car. So between the woods surrounding the property, the 2 buildings, the shed, and the cornfield, we realized this was a perfect spot to play hide and seek tag. It was broad daylight right now. We decided our oldest brother Tony would be seeker first, and we'd go in order, oldest to youngest. So the rest of us went to go hide. I went to go hide in the crops. I heard Tony call out, "Ready or not, here I come," and so I simply sat down in the browning crops, completely hidden. I waited and waited until I heard a rustling in the crops and footsteps crunching the rotted dead crop leaves on the ground. I didn't know which of my brothers it was, but I wasn't taking a chance. I ran out of the crops and into the grass and up the hill towards the red shed. I expected Tony to come out after me, but he didn't, so I figured it was one of my little brothers. I heard commotion as Tony was chasing my 10-year-old brother George down the hill on the other side of the house, and the two were laughing and screaming. Tony caught him, and so George was out. I stayed put behind the shed. Then I noticed Todd, leaning against the back wall of the house, looking at me laughing. I put my finger up to my lips to go shh, and he did the same. Then I thought to myself, wait, who was in the cornfield with me then? Tony came around the house and immediately and easily tagged Todd, and then he saw me since I was in a straight line of sight from him. I started running down the hill, which gave me a good speed boost, but Tony got that same speed boost, and he was bigger and faster than me. He caught me with ease. The four of us met at the bottom of the hill by the road, and I was supposed to be up next. But I asked everyone if anyone had gone in the crops as well. When all of them said no, I got scared. I told them I heard someone walking in the crops, and it may have been the homeowner, so we should leave. With that, we left in a hurry and walked back to the mobile home, where our parents were watching a movie in the living room. For dinner, we went to the local pizzeria that we all loved. From what I remember, our dad told us that nobody lived in that house that we were playing at. So, when we got back and it was dark out, we just knew we wanted to play flashlight tag now. Our mom didn't want Todd coming out with us past dark, and I'm sure they only let us go because Tony was 14 and they thought he was old enough to keep an eye on us. So the three of us ventured off back to that house to play flashlight tag, which basically is hide and seek, but if you get exposed by the seeker with a flashlight, you're out. Once we got to the property again, it was like 90% dark out. They wanted me to seek this time since Tony did last time, so I turned around and counted to 60, and then I shouted, "I'm coming." I kept the flashlight off as a strategy to not give away my position. I could just barely see enough to navigate around. I ran up the hill to the house, which had no lights on. I peered around the walls of the house, and then the shed. I didn't see either of them. I looked into the trees, and decided to turn my flashlight on and look through the tree line. Still nothing, so I turned the flashlight back off. I knew one of them had to be in the cornfield. It was too obvious of a hiding spot. It was small enough that I could check it out. I got to the bottom of the hill by the cornfield and quietly pushed my way in. It was hard not to make noise in here, but I tried my best. I also kept the flashlight off to not make it obvious I was in here. I didn't realize until now that it was dark out how absolutely scary this was at night. As I was sneaking around the crops, I heard footsteps inside the crops. I had to be sneaky if I wanted to catch them. I honed in on exactly where the footsteps were coming from, and when I heard them right on top of me, I turned on my flashlight and yelled, "Caught," but all I saw was the back of someone running away from the light. "Who is that?" I said. "You're out." Then I heard this creepy laughter. It wasn't the laughter of my brothers, or any kid for that matter. It sounded like some deranged adult. I was frozen, apart from moving my hand with the flashlight around trying to see who it was. I heard a grown man's voice say very softly, "Can I play with you guys?" And then I saw his face. It was half covered by the few crops still separating the two of us. From what I could tell, he had this kind of deformed-looking face. I really couldn't tell if it was a mask or not. I ran out of the crops and started yelling my brothers' names, saying, "Run, game over." I heard them both yell back at me from the same spot. They hid together. I saw them running down the hill with their flashlights on. I turned mine on and told them to just keep running. We ran all the way down the road until we got back to our property, and we were out of breath. But I told them there was some deformed-looking, freaky man hiding in the crops, and that he was probably the one I heard in the crops earlier too. I still remember their faces when I told them this. When I told my parents, they looked confused, and my dad didn't seem to know how to react. My mom made it clear she didn't want us going off the property past dark anymore. Honestly, I didn't want to anyway. I had trouble sleeping that night, thinking, what if that man was outside in the pitch darkness, outside one of the windows? I could tell I freaked everyone out a little bit with my description of the man. I had no reason to make it up though, and they knew that. It goes without saying we didn't go back to that property up the road. Thank God it wasn't that close to our property. My family sold the property only a few years after this.